They told me the guest room was becoming an office. It just makes more sense, Mom. My son said, his eyes drifting somewhere past me. We're running out of space. I smiled the way I always did. Of course, I said. I had said that word so many times over the years. It had lost all resistance. It slipped out easily now, like it belonged to someone else. That was early spring. By summer, the room was no longer mine, though no one ever said it outright. The bed disappeared, the drawers were emptied. A desk stood where my suitcase used to rest when I visited. One afternoon, while voices and the sound of tools carried from the other room, I quietly gathered the last of my things. A cardigan, a few small items I had left behind over time. As if I still had a place there, I put them into a paper grocery bag. No one noticed, no one asked what I was doing, no one said, wait. The truth was, I had been disappearing from that house long before that day. This was just the first time it felt official. I carried the bag to my car and drove home slowly. Inside it were small pieces of a life that no longer fit anywhere. A photograph of my husband, Gerald, taken before illness changed him, and a ceramic mug my granddaughter Sophie had painted for me. My name curved unevenly across it in purple. Margaret, not Mom, not Grandma, just Margaret. And somehow, that meant everything. Sophie still saw me, not as a role, not as someone who fills a space when needed, but as a person. When I got home, I placed the mug on the windowsill and stood there longer than necessary. Then I made coffee. I didn't want and sat at the table where Gerald and I used to do crosswords on Sunday mornings. The chair across from me had been empty for 9 years. Some absences never settle. The call came a week later. My son rarely called anymore, so I noticed the difference immediately. His voice was light, carefully so. We're taking the kids to Japan this summer. He said, Tokyo, Kyoto, maybe Hiroshima. They're really excited. I waited. We just wanted you to know, he added. Not come with us, not you should join, just information. I told him it sounded wonderful. I asked about Sophie. I said everything that was expected of me. When we hung up, I sat with the phone in my lap, staring at nothing. Japan, Gerald and I had once planned that trip. We'd bought a phrasebook, optimistic, unnecessary, full of phrases we never got to use. It still lived in my bedside drawer. I had carried it with me for years, unable to let it go. That night, I took it out. The cover showed a red gate standing in still water. I ran my fingers over it, as if something might open. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I chose myself. The travel agency was small, almost forgotten, with a faded map in the window. I'd like to go to Japan, I said. The woman behind the desk looked up. When? August. How many travelers? I held up one finger. She didn't hesitate, just nodded and began. I left 4 days before my son and his family. I didn't tell them. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even defiance. It was something quieter. Something that finally belonged to me. The flight was long, but I didn't mind. For the first time in years, I was alone in a way that didn't feel like absence. It felt like space. When I arrived in Tokyo, everything moved too fast at first, the signs. The crowds, the unfamiliar rhythm of it all. I stood still for a moment, unsure. Then my suitcase appeared on the carousel, the yellow ribbon I'd tied catching my eye. I reached for it, and something inside me settled. I was here, I had done this. That first night, I found a small restaurant with pictures on the menu. I pointed at something and smiled awkwardly. A bowl of ramen arrived, warm. Fragrant, unfamiliar, I ate slowly. No one interrupted me, no one needed anything. No one was waiting for me to respond. It was the first time in years I had sat alone and felt whole. The days unfolded gently after that. I walked without rushing. I noticed things. The sound of wind chimes, the way light settled between narrow buildings, the quiet dignity of small moments. And then I met Eleanor. She sat beside me on a bench near a temple, composed and steady. First time, she asked. I nodded. It won't be your last, she said. There was something in the way she said it, certainty without pressure. We spent the day together, then another, then more. She showed me how to look again. Not quickly, not politely, fully. When I told her about my son, about the room, about the slow way I had been set aside, she listened without interrupting. Then she asked, did you tell them how it felt? I shook my head. She nodded. That's what happens when you stop expecting to be heard. The words stayed with me. A few days later, my phone lit up. My son, they were leaving soon. Did I want to see the kids? Then another message. They were too busy, and another, he hoped I was okay. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then I put it away. For once, I didn't adjust myself to fit into the space offered. Kyoto changed something in me. Maybe it was the stillness, maybe the way time seemed to soften there, or maybe it was simply that I had stopped pretending. One evening, I sat alone and recorded a message. My voice was calm, my hands were not. I love you, I said, that hasn't changed. But somewhere along the way, I became invisible. And I helped that happen. I made myself smaller so it would be easier. I paused. I'm not doing that anymore. I sent it and sat in the quiet, feeling my heart beat like it hadn't in years. The reply came later. I listened, he wrote. I don't know what to say yet, but I listened. It wasn't everything, but it was real. I met Sophie in messages before I saw her again. She found out I was in Japan and couldn't believe it. You're the coolest person I know, she wrote. I laughed out loud, it surprised me. When I came home, the house felt the same. But I didn't, the silence no longer pressed in on me. It belonged to me. A few days later, Sophie came over. Tell me everything, she said. So I did. I told her about the places, the people, the quiet moments that had shifted something deep inside me. She listened carefully, then she said, Dad feels really bad. I nodded. He doesn't have to say it perfectly. I said, he just has to try. He came the next evening, alone. He stood in the doorway, unsure. Like he used to when he was younger. I didn't realize, he said, and this time I believed him. We talked for hours, not perfectly, not easily, but honestly, and that mattered more than anything. Things didn't become perfect, but they became real, and real was enough. Weeks later, I sat on my porch as evening settled in. I opened my notebook and wrote, things I am no longer waiting for. An invitation, permission, the right moment. Someone else to decide I matter. I closed the notebook and looked out at the quiet street. I was 67 years old. I had traveled alone. I had spoken the truth. I had stopped disappearing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was fully here. I hadn't asked for permission. I hadn't waited to be chosen. I simply packed a bag and went.